The night of the Whitmore Charity Gala was supposed to be another glittering triumph for the city's elite. Champagne flutes clinking under crystal chandeliers, laughter echoing through the grand hall, and Eleanor Whitmore, the poised and enigmatic hostess, gliding through the crowd in a gown that cost more than most people made in a year. But by midnight, she was gone. The last confirmed sighting of Eleanor came just past 11, when a guest, an aging socialite with a penchant for gossip, noticed her slipping through the French doors into the moonlit garden. The woman later claimed Eleanor seemed tense, her smile strained, as if she were forcing herself to play the part of the gracious hostess. Moments later, raised voices carried from the hedges, though no one could make out the words. Then, silence. When Richard Whitmore, Eleanor's husband, realized she was missing, he initially dismissed it. "She probably needed air," he told the butler, swirling his brandy with practiced nonchalance. But by dawn, when her bed remained untouched and her phone went straight to voicemail, even Richard's carefully cultivated composure began to crack. The police were called, and the sprawling Whitmore estate, once a symbol of untouchable privilege, became a crime scene. The only physical clue was a scrap of fabric, torn from what must have been an expensive dress, snagged on the iron garden gate as if someone had rushed through in a hurry. There were no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints on the gate, and, most frustratingly, no usable security footage. The cameras had been working perfectly all evening, until the exact moment Eleanor stepped outside. Was it an abduction, an escape, or something even darker? By the time Detective James Holloway arrived, the press had already begun spinning theories. The guests had scattered with their own versions of the story, and Richard Whitmore stood in the center of it all, his grief just a little too measured, his answers just a little too smooth. And so, with the first light of morning, the mystery of the missing Mrs. Whitmore began. The call came in just after dawn, slicing through the quiet of Detective James Holloway's cramped apartment. He had been awake already. Sleep had never come easy, not since the O'Connor case went bad, and the sharp ring of the phone only deepened the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. "Holloway," he grunted into the receiver, rubbing the grit from his eyes. On the other end, Captain Reynolds' voice was clipped, urgent. "We've got a high-profile missing persons case. Eleanor Whitmore. Vanished from her own gala last night. The brass wants you on it. Today." Holloway exhaled through his teeth. The Whitmores. Old money, political connections, the kind of people who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Exactly the kind of case he hated. By the time he pulled up to the Whitmore estate, the place was swarming with uniforms, forensics, and a small army of reporters already camped at the gates. The mansion loomed over them all, a sprawling monument to wealth, its manicured lawns and marble columns practically screaming "Stay out." Holloway adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of eyes on him as he stepped inside. Richard Whitmore was waiting in the study, standing stiffly by the fireplace like a man posing for a portrait. He was handsome in that polished silver fox way. Expensive suit, perfect hair, the kind of face that belonged on a magazine cover. But his knuckles were white around the glass in his hand, and his voice had a brittle edge when he spoke. "Detective, thank you for coming." Holloway didn't bother with pleasantries. "Tell me about your wife." What followed was a performance Holloway had seen too many times before. The rehearsed concern, the careful omissions, the way Richard's gaze flicked toward the door whenever the questions got too pointed. Yes, Eleanor had seemed distracted lately. No, they hadn't fought. No, he couldn't imagine who would want to harm her. It was all too clean, too perfect. The staff were worse. The maid stammered. The butler recited answers like he'd memorized them, and the chauffeur, Marcus, had the wary look of a man who knew more than he was saying. Every alibi lined up just a little too neatly, every statement just a little too polished. Then there was the security footage, or rather, the lack of it. The system had recorded the entire evening in crisp detail, except for the 20-minute window when Eleanor disappeared. A glitch, the head of security insisted, sweating under Holloway's stare. By the time Holloway left the estate, the sun was high, but the case felt darker than ever. Richard Whitmore was hiding something. The staff were lying. And Eleanor? She was out there somewhere, vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a torn scrap of fabric and a house full of secrets. Holloway lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly into the crisp morning air. This wasn't just a missing persons case, it was a puzzle, and every piece was buried under layers of money, power, and lies. The Whitmore mansion felt different at night, less like a home and more like a museum of carefully preserved lies. Detective Holloway moved through Eleanor's dressing room with a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating bottles of French perfume and jeweled hair combs that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He hadn't expected to find anything. The forensics team had already swept the room, and the Whitmore staff had assured him Mrs. Whitmore kept no secrets. But Holloway had learned long ago that people like the Whitmores didn't keep their secrets in drawers. They hid them in plain sight. Then his gloved fingers brushed against the back of her vanity mirror. A slight unevenness in the wood. A push, a click, and a narrow compartment slid open. Inside were the letters. 5 of them, neatly folded. The paper expensive, but slightly worn at the edges, as though they'd been read and reread. Holloway unfolded the first one carefully, the faint scent of Eleanor's perfume still clinging to the page. "My darling," it began, "these stolen moments aren't enough anymore. We both know what needs to happen." No signature. Just a single initial at the bottom, J. The other letters were variations on the same theme, urgency, longing, a relationship hurtling towards some inevitable conclusion. One passage stood out, sharp as a knife. "Meet me at the old boathouse. We need to end this." Dated the night of the gala. Holloway sat back on his heels, the letters spread before him like a trail of breadcrumbs. An affair? Possibly. But the tone wasn't just romantic, it was desperate, like someone backed into a corner. He thought of Richard Whitmore's too perfect grief, the way the staff had tensed at certain questions, thought of the broken necklace at the boathouse, the bloodstains that seemed too conveniently placed. And then there was the handwriting, elegant, looping, decidedly not Richard's, but someone else's, someone close. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Holloway snapped off the flashlight, pressing himself against the wall. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, soft, retreating footsteps. Someone had been watching. He slipped the letters into his coat, his mind already racing. Eleanor Whitmore hadn't just disappeared. She'd been running, and someone had been chasing her. The old Whitmore boathouse crouched at the edge of Blackwater Lake like a forgotten sentinel, its weather-beaten planks groaning under the weight of decades. Detective Holloway picked his way down the overgrown path, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the pre-dawn mist. The place should have been abandoned, locked up since the family stopped summering at the lake, but the fresh tire tracks in the mud and the recently broken padlock told a different story. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something sharper, copper, metallic, blood. The beam of light caught the dark stain near the rotting dock, its edges smeared as if someone had tried and failed to scrub it away. Nearby, half buried in the damp wood shavings, lay a broken silver chain, its pendant missing. Holloway crouched, turning it over in his gloved hand. He'd seen this necklace before, in the portrait hanging in the Whitmore foyer. Eleanor had been wearing it the day the painting was made. A floorboard creaked above him. Holloway froze, his hand drifting to his sidearm. The boathouse had a second level, a loft where old fishing gear was stored. Someone was up there, breathing, waiting. He took the stairs 2 at a time, the wood protesting under his weight. The loft was a shadowy nest of tarps and rusted tackle, the weak morning light bleeding through cracks in the walls. And then he saw him, an old man in a tattered windbreaker, hunched behind a stack of moldy life preservers. "Don't shoot!" The man's voice was rough with fear. "I ain't done nothing." Tommy Riggs, the local fisherman who'd been plying these waters for 40 years. Holloway lowered his gun but kept his guard up as Riggs spilled his story in a whiskey-tinged slur. He'd been out on the lake the night of the gala, coming in late after checking his nets. Saw a woman, fancy dress like one of them society dames, arguing with a man near the boathouse. He grabbed her arm, Riggs muttered, eyes darting to the bloodstain below. She pulled away, and then a pause. Then I heard a scream, just one. After that, nothing. They was gone. Holloway pressed him, the man's face, the woman's words, anything. But Riggs just shook his head. Was too dark. But that lady, she dropped something when she ran. From his pocket, the fisherman produced a single pearl earring. Eleanor's. The pieces clicked together with cold certainty. The argument in the garden, the missing security footage, the letters, and now this, a confrontation that had turned violent. But one question burned brighter than the rest. If Eleanor had fled here, where had she gone next? And why had no one seen her since? The rain came down in sheets as Holloway's car idled outside Clara Dawson's apartment building, a sleek, modern complex that didn't match the salary of a junior gallery assistant, the kind of place someone else paid for. He found her on the 4th floor, framed in the doorway of a loft that smelled of jasmine and oil paint. Clara was younger than he'd expected, mid-20s, with Eleanor's same sharp cheekbones but none of her polished restraint. Her eyes went straight to the badge in his hand, and for a fraction of a second, something raw flickered across her face. Fear, guilt, relief. "Detective Holloway." She stepped aside without being asked. "I wondered when you'd come." The apartment told the story before she did. Sketches of Richard Whitmore tucked in a drawer. A receipt for a hotel, the same one where Holloway had traced credit card charges from Richard's secret account. And on the nightstand, a silver cufflink, monogrammed RW, glinting in the lamplight like an accusation. Clara didn't deny it. "Yes, we were involved," she said, fingers tightening around her teacup. "But if you think I heard Eleanor, you're wrong." Holloway let the silence stretch, watching her flinch under its weight. "She found out," Clara finally whispered. "Last month. She threatened to ruin Richard. Said she'd go public with the embezzlement unless he ended things with me." A ledger sat open on the coffee table, its pages filled with Clara's neat handwriting, dates, amounts, offshore account numbers. "I kept records," she said. "Insurance, in case Richard ever turned on me." Holloway picked up the ledger, his pulse quickening. The sums were staggering, enough to disappear forever, enough to kill for. "Where were you the night of the gala?" Clara's laugh was brittle. "Here, alone, but you'll have to take my word for it." She met his gaze, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Richard's the one you should be asking. He was supposed to meet Eleanor that night, to talk. Only she never came back." Outside, the rain hammered against the windows. Holloway studied the woman before him, the tremor in her hands, the defiance in her eyes. Was she a scorned lover, an accomplice, or just another pawn in Richard's game? One thing was certain: the Whitmore marriage hadn't been broken. It had been a war, and Clara Dawson had been right in the middle of it. The garage smelled of gasoline and leather polish, the kind of sterile cleanliness that came from meticulous upkeep. Marcus Vale stood beside the Whitmore family's black town car, polishing the hood with a chamois cloth in slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't look up when Holloway entered, just kept working the cloth in circles, as if the detective were nothing more than another smudge to be wiped away. "You drove Mrs. Whitmore the night she disappeared." Holloway didn't frame it as a question. Marcus's hands stilled for half a second before resuming their rhythm. "I drive a lot of people, Detective." "Not like this." Holloway pulled out his phone, displaying the security footage he'd pried loose from a traffic camera half a mile from the estate. Grainy, but unmistakable. The town car, its license plate clear, turning onto the old lakeside road at 11:37 p.m. Eleanor's pale face visible through the window, her expression unreadable. The chamois cloth slipped from Marcus's fingers. For a long moment, the only sound was the drip of a leaky faucet in the corner. Then the chauffeur let out a slow breath and reached into his breast pocket. Not for a weapon, for a cigarette. He lit it with hands that barely shook, the flare of the match casting shadows under his eyes. "She paid me $5,000 in cash," he said, exhaling smoke. "Told me if anyone asked, I dropped her off at the boathouse and left. But that's not what happened." Holloway leaned against the fender, letting the silence stretch. Marcus stared at the glowing tip of his cigarette. "We drove past the lake, kept going all the way to the old private airstrip near Millwood. She had a bag with her, just one, small, like she'd packed light. Holloway's pulse kicked. "Who was waiting for her?" "Didn't see anyone, just the plane. A Cessna, engines already running." Marcus flicked ash onto the concrete. "She didn't look scared, just resolved, like she'd made up her mind about something." "And Richard?" A humorless smile. "He paid me $10,000 the next morning to forget I ever drove her." Holloway studied the man's face, the tightness around his mouth, the way his thumb rubbed against his fingertips, as if still feeling the weight of that blood money. "Why tell me now?" Marcus dropped the cigarette, grinding it under his heel. "Because that plane wasn't scheduled. No flight plan, no records. And the tail number?" He met Holloway's gaze at last. It was painted over. The pieces clicked together with cold clarity. Eleanor hadn't just fled, she'd planned this, meticulously. But someone else had been planning too. The safe was hidden behind a false panel in Eleanor Whitmore's private study, a fact Holloway only discovered after splintering the mahogany wainscoting with a crowbar. Inside, nestled between stacks of bonds and a velvet jewelry case, lay a passport. Not Eleanor's. The name read Claire Voss, but the face was unmistakably hers. Those same piercing eyes, that same composed smile, now frozen in the sterile glow of a government-issued photo. The expiration date was 3 years away. Holloway flipped through the pages. Stamps from the Caymans, Switzerland, a half-dozen other countries with strict banking privacy laws. Then he found the other documents, a driver's license, a birth certificate, even a college diploma from a small European university, all meticulously forged under the same alias. This wasn't just an escape plan, it was a second life. The ledger from Clara's apartment suddenly made horrifying sense. Those offshore transfers weren't just Richard's embezzlement. They were Eleanor's, siphoned off over years, routed through shell companies until the money became untraceable. She hadn't been trying to expose her husband's crimes. She'd been replicating them. The final piece was in the jewelry case, a USB drive disguised as a lipstick tube. The files within laid it all bare. Flight manifests for that phantom Cessna, booked under Voss, not Whitmore. Blueprints for the boathouse bloodstains setup, animal blood purchased online, even a time-stamped photo of Eleanor boarding the plane, taken by Marcus's replacement, a driver she'd hired. But the most damning file was the last one, a video diary recorded the morning of the gala. "If you're watching this, James," Eleanor's hologram self said with a wry smile, "it means I'm finally free. Richard gets his scandal, I get my life, and you get the satisfaction of knowing you were right up until the moment you weren't." The screen flickered as she leaned closer. "The blood is Pig's blood from his hunting trip last fall. The necklace was a decoy. I haven't worn it since I learned he gave Clara its twin. And the letters?" A laugh like shattering crystal. "I wrote them myself. Every last one." Holloway's grip tightened on the drive, every clue, every breadcrumb, all carefully planted. The boathouse confrontation? Staged. The fisherman's testimony? Paid for. Even Clara's betrayal had been part of the script, her affair with Richard manipulated to perfection. Eleanor hadn't been missing. She'd been orchestrating. And now, somewhere in the world with a new face and $47 million in untraceable assets, Claire Voss was laughing. The fishing village of Puerto Isadore had no police station, no tourists, and certainly no extradition treaties with the United States. Just a crumbling boardwalk, a handful of cantinas, and a single villa perched on the cliffs where the jungle met the sea. Holloway spotted her from half a mile away, a silhouette in white linen against the terracotta tiles, her dark hair now sun-bleached and loose. Eleanor Whitmore, or whatever she called herself now, sipping coffee on her veranda, like a woman without a care in the world. She didn't run when she saw him, didn't even stand. Just set down her cup and said, "You took longer than I expected." Up close, she looked younger. The tension that had always pinched her features in society photos was gone, replaced by something dangerously like peace. Behind her, through the open French doors, Holloway could see the evidence of her new life. A half-packed suitcase, a burner phone charging on the nightstand, a Glock 19 on the dresser. "You're not here to arrest me," she observed, pouring him a coffee without asking. "If you were, there'd be helicopters, Interpol, not just a tired detective with salt in his hair." Holloway left the coffee untouched. "The blood was Pig's blood. The letters were in your handwriting. You played everyone. Clara, Richard, even me." Eleanor, no, Claire, smiled. "Richard played himself. All I did was give him the rope." She nodded toward the tablet on the table, its screen displaying a live news feed. "Whitmore indicted for embezzlement as search for missing Iris continues." "He'll spend years in prison," Holloway said. "Not enough." Her voice went razor sharp. "You saw the medical reports, the broken ribs he called falling down the stairs, the concussion that was a tennis accident." Her fingers brushed a nearly invisible scar along her hairline. "The prenup kept me quiet for 15 years, but it couldn't keep me there forever." A gust of wind carried the scent of salt and frangipani. Somewhere below the cliffs, a boat engine coughed to life. "So what now?" Holloway asked. "You just disappear." She stood, smoothing her linen trousers. "I already have." For the first time, he noticed the duffel by the door, the passport peeking out from her pocket. That boat wasn't just fishing, it was her exit strategy. Again. Holloway reached into his jacket, not for his badge, but for the envelope, the one containing Marcus's sworn affidavit, the security footage, everything that could blow her cover wide open. He set it on the table between them. You're giving me a choice? She sounded genuinely surprised. No, he said, turning toward the door. You already made yours. Behind him, the envelope burst into flames in the villa's fireplace. By the time Holloway reached the jeep, the boat was already a speck on the horizon, vanishing into the glittering blue. Some puzzles, he decided, were better left unsolved. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.